Tesla updated their EPA estimated range numbers for the Model 3 and Y, and it's mostly good news if you were in the market for using the default tires on the Model 3 or Y. I guess it's slightly bad news, though, if you were the type of person to want the 20-inch induction wheels on the Y or the 19-inch sport wheels on the 3, because those range numbers went a tad down. But because I don't care about those bigger tires, I see this as an absolute win, because now the long-range Model Y starts at 330 miles of range, which looks great, but if you opt for the 20-inch wheels, then it goes down to 318 miles, which is still good. It's like a minuscule difference, but I do think it's good overall, given Tesla started like default opting you to the larger size tires when people just go to the website now, because the estimated delivery times for those are sooner, even though they're more expensive. So if that's like the default option, a lot of people are probably going forward with now, because I don't know, some people might just go on the website and click buy as soon as possible, and they don't realize that they have the larger tires opted. But being upfront with these range estimates, which they already were with the Model S and X, it's good to see some honesty so that they say, you know, if you opt for these tires, you are going to get a bit of a range hit, and your range will technically be better if you go with the cheaper included tires. But the most amount of changes probably came with the Model 3, because Tesla has now dropped the Standard Range Plus name, which, thank goodness. I hated that name so much, especially like anything with plus when there's no non-plus variant made no sense to me. But they took it in a direction I wasn't really anticipating. While I would have suggested just calling it Standard Range because there's only one version of that model, instead they now just call it Model 3 Rear-Wheel Drive, which I suppose is pretty simple and easy to understand. It's a little bit weird on the website to just have a tier that says Model 3 and nothing else, but this got a range boost as well. Assuming you go with the Aero wheels, now the rear-wheel drive Model 3, which is the cheapest one, starting at $44,000, goes 272 miles on a charge, which is pretty great if you consider that's pretty much as bad as it gets in terms of range options on Tesla's website. I mean, if you go for the rear-wheel drive with sport tires now, it only goes a little bit lower to 267 miles. But between all the different configurations, I'm happy to now say if you're buying a new Tesla, 267 is the lowest you can possibly get. For the cheapest Tesla with the smallest battery pack, you're still getting basically 270 miles on a charge, which is amazing considering there's a lot of EVs out there that even with their best options struggle to get around 270 miles of range. So Tesla's worst is a lot of companies' best, and I personally think 270 miles is plenty. But my, of course, curiosity here is, why are these range numbers going up if Tesla is really only just playing around with the tire options? I'm not sure if beforehand Tesla wasn't being very specific with their EPA tests, so they were just going for a middle ground average between how the sport wheels performed and how the Aero wheels performed, and they just went down the middle. Now they're not going down the middle anymore, so we're seeing a range bump. But the difference here with the rear-wheel drive Model 3 is that beforehand it was 262 miles, which means that even if you opt for the sport tires, we're still seeing an overall range improvement. Makes me wonder if they're unlocking more of that buffer zone on the lithium iron phosphate Model 3s, or this is probably me overthinking it a tad, but I'm kind of confused by the wording on Tesla's last shareholder deck, because that's where they said we have shifted to lithium iron phosphate on all standard range Teslas globally, which a lot of people took that as, okay, now the Fremont made Model 3 is lithium iron phosphate, but now they've dropped the term standard range in the United States. So that's a, I guess, bigger headline you can throw out there. There's no standard range Teslas in the US anymore, just rear-wheel drive in long range. So does that mean that these Model 3s still use the 2170 cells? I don't know. It's probably just more likely that Tesla doesn't like the term standard range plus, and they thought that was too complicated, and given the Model 3 is literally the only Tesla that had that option, they were like, let's just call it rear-wheel drive, because the range is over 270 miles now, which honestly isn't even that bad. That's still plenty for a lot of customers out there, so let's not imply that this is standard range, because that means it's lower or worse. Let's just say it's rear-wheel drive and don't have to worry about the range at all. Of course, let me know your theories down below. You know, I've seen Elon reply to Electric and Teslarati articles in the past, and both those news agencies have now said that the Fremont-made Model 3s have switched to lithium iron phosphate, and if that weren't true, I just have a feeling Elon would chime in on that a lot quicker and say like, no, we're still using 2170 cells for that Model 3, so I'm pretty convinced these are still lithium iron phosphate Model 3s. But it, of course, is great news to find out that even with prismatic, LFP batteries in these Model 3s, we're still getting over 270 miles of range. That is wonderful and fantastic. But of course, with these new specific tire options, we got some range boosts to the long-range Model 3, which was already of tremendous value. Now, for $50,000, you can go 358 miles on a charge. Dang. Like, the value on this model, I think, is truly unappreciated. I know everybody wants the Model Y, and that's kind of the star of the show right now, but considering the Model 3 is not using the same Giga castings that the Model Y is, and it doesn't really sound like they plan on switching it to 4680s anytime soon, or giving it the structural battery pack anytime soon. So just the fact that with the 2170 cells and like the dated chassis design of the 3, for 50 grand, you can still go over 350 miles on a charge. Show me any other EV that's coming close to that, right? Like, I've seen a few EVs that are like sub $50,000, but any of the sub 50k EVs really have a hard time breaking the 300 mile mark, let alone 350 mile mark. So that is just insanely good, and to see those numbers get even stronger is wonderful. But now, of course, reality sets in with the sport wheel option. So if you get the sport tires on the long range Model 3, then the range now drops to 334 miles, which is actually quite a bit. Considering all the other large versus smaller tire options were a difference of like 10 miles, this one is like more than 20 mile difference. So that might implore more and more people to go with the Aero tires on the long range Model 3. No range changes for any of the performance Model 3 or Model Y options. Those did not change. However, Tesla did update the range options on the Model X to suggest that you lose just a couple of miles of range if you opt for the 7-seater or the 6-seater. Not a big deal. I don't think it will convince anyone to not go for it, but I just appreciate the honesty and Tesla getting more precise about these range numbers, and I do think it's good for the public to be aware that there are actually some range drawbacks if you opt for these larger tires, because a lot of people I don't think were aware of that, and we're just thinking, okay, they look cool, I'll go for those. Especially with the long range Model 3, I think it's a good indication to let people know, okay, these are going to impact the range a bit. Overall, I'm glad Tesla dropped the standard range naming. I'm curious to see if they're going to do that overseas. What naming do you think would make more sense, or do you think this was the right call? Are you convinced that lithium iron phosphate is still definitely being used in this rear-wheel drive Model 3? All that good stuff, feel free to let me know what you're thinking down below, and thank you to everyone who's been supporting us on the Tesla Fund over on Patreon. Helps me get much, much closer to buying a Tesla of my own that I can cover for the channel. Have a great day.